Captain Jake Bulldog Morrison stared at the smoking crater that used to be New Topeka Colony and wondered, not for the first time, why humans had such a talent for finding trouble in the galaxy. The research vessel Lucky Break hovered over the devastation while his crew ran scans that would probably tell them exactly what he already knew. Someone had very thoroughly ruined a perfectly good Tuesday for about 3,000 colonists. Captain called out Pip from the engineering station, a voice carrying that particular note of enthusiasm that made Jake's eye twitch. The kid was 22, brilliant, and had the annoying habit of being excited about literally everything, including impending doom. The energy signatures are completely off the charts. I've never seen anything like this dispersal pattern. Wonderful, Jake muttered, scratching his graying beard. Rosa, tell me you've got something more useful than Pip's scientific glee. Commander Rosa Martinez looked up from the tactical console, her expression grim enough to curdle milk. Rosa had exactly two settings, mildly concerned and preparing for war. But today she was definitely leaning toward the latter. Scorch marks are consistent with military-grade plasma weapons, but the configuration is wrong for any known human tech. The settlement's defensive grid was taken out in under 30 seconds. 30 seconds? Jake raised an eyebrow. Either these colonists forgot to pay their defense contractor, or we're dealing with someone who brought way too much gun to this particular party. Professor Elias Bumblethorne wandered over from his science station, looking like he'd just discovered something fascinating in his coffee cup, which, knowing Bumblethorne, he probably had. The man was 60-something, absent-minded enough to forget his own birthday, but could calculate hyperspace coordinates in his head while humming show tunes. Captain, I've been analyzing the residual particle traces, Bumblethorne said, adjusting his glasses. The weapon signatures suggest technology that's at least a century ahead of current galactic standard. However, there's something peculiar about the targeting patterns. They seem to prioritize structures with the highest population density, but they left the infrastructure largely intact. Jake felt that familiar tingle at the base of his skull that usually preceded very bad news. You're telling me someone with super advanced weapons attacked a human colony, killed everyone, but left the lights on? Precisely. Bumblethorne beamed as if Jake had just solved a particularly clever riddle. It suggests they wanted the facilities operational for future use. Future use, Jake repeated slowly. Rosa, how many colonies have gone dark in the past 6 months? Rosa's fingers danced across her console. 17 confirmed, 8 more with no contact for over 2 weeks. All frontier settlements, all human. All human, Jake said, staring at the ruins below. 23 years in the Colonial Defense Force had taught him that when bad things happened exclusively to humans, it usually meant someone had decided humans were either very valuable or very annoying. In his experience, both options led to roughly the same amount of shooting. How long until we can get a message back to Fleet Command? 2 hours to the nearest relay station, Captain. Jake nodded grimly. Something told him they were going to need backup. Lots of backup. Possibly all of the backup. Set course for the relay. And Pip. Send a priority alert to Admiral Chen. Tell her we've got ourselves a situation out here. As the Lucky Break turned away from the devastated colony, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to discover exactly why their ship was named so ironically. 3 days later, Jake's pessimism proved beautifully accurate when a fleet of sleek, silver ships dropped out of hyperspace around them, like angry hornets emerging from a very expensive hive. The vessels were gorgeous in that threatening way that screamed we spent way too much money making our weapons look pretty. Captain, Rosa announced with her usual cheerful delivery of terrible news, we're being hailed by the lead vessel. They're also targeting us with enough firepower to turn us into a small nebula. Put them on screen, Jake said, settling back in his command chair. Let's see who's been redecorating our colonies. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a creature that looked like someone had crossed a lizard with a fashion disaster. The alien wore what appeared to be a military uniform designed by someone who thought gold braid was a food group. Its scaled face bore an expression of supreme smugness that made Jake want to punch something. Greetings. Inferior species, The alien announced in accented standard. I am Admiral Vextar the Magnificent, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Supremacy Fleet. You will surrender your vessel and prepare to be processed. Jake blinked. Processed? Like cheese? Vextar's reptilian features twisted in confusion. I do not understand this cheese reference. You will be evaluated for your usefulness to the supremacy. Right, Jake said slowly. And you are? I have already stated my name and titles. Human. No, I mean, who are you people? What's this supremacy business? Vextar drew himself up to his full height, which Jake estimated at about 7 feet of pure condescension. We are your superiors, primitive creature. For too long, lesser species have been allowed to spread unchecked throughout the galaxy. The supremacy has decided to correct this error by placing all inferior races in their proper positions. Which is servitude. Naturally, your species shows particular promise as laborers. You are surprisingly durable and breed at an acceptable rate. Jake felt his eyes start twitching again. You've been kidnapping human colonists to use as slaves. Kidnapping is such an ugly word, Vextar said with a dismissive wave. We prefer harvesting. Your colonies were simply the most efficient source of quality workers. Quality workers, Jake repeated. Behind him, he could hear Rosa's knuckles cracking. Pip had gone very quiet, which was never a good sign. Bumblethorn was furiously scribbling notes, probably calculating the mathematical probability of Jake doing something spectacularly stupid. Indeed, Vextar continued, oblivious to the rising tension on the bridge. Humans possess an admirable stubbornness and an irritating refusal to die easily. These traits make excellent servants, once properly motivated. Properly motivated, Jake said. Fear is an excellent motivator, as is the safety of one's offspring. But did it? Jake felt something cold and unpleasant settle in his stomach. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You've been attacking human colonies, killing anyone who resists, and enslaving the survivors. Your understanding is adequate for a primitive mind, and you think this is acceptable because you consider yourself superior. It is not a matter of opinion, human. It is fact. Jake stood up slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice level. Well, Admiral Vextar the Magnificent, I have some news for you. You just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Vextar's laugh sounded like a garbage disposal eating a kazoo. Threats from an inferior species are amusing but ultimately meaningless. That wasn't a threat, Jake said. That was a friendly warning. You see, there's something you should have researched before you started this harvesting business. And what is that? Human history. Jake smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Specifically, what happens when someone tries to enslave us? The last thing Jake saw before the tractor beam engaged was Vextar's confused expression. As the lucky brake was pulled into the alien mothership's docking bay, Jake turned to his crew. Pip, please tell me you got that message off to Fleet Command. Already sent, Captain. Full tactical analysis and enemy fleet composition. Good girl. Rosa, how long do you think it'll take them to realize we're not going to cooperate? Knowing you, Captain? About 5 minutes. Bumblethorn. Start analyzing their tech. I want to know how it works and how to break it. Already on it. The professor said cheerfully. Their tractor beam technology is fascinating but has several obvious design flaws. As the docking clamps engaged, Jake grinned. Gentlemen, ladies, I do believe these aliens are about to get a very comprehensive education in why you don't mess with humanity. The airlock cycled open, revealing a squad of armed aliens in shiny armor. Their leader stepped forward with all the authority of someone who'd never met a human having a really bad day. You will come with us, the alien commanded. Sure thing, Jake said pleasantly. Lead the way. As they were escorted through corridors that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a serious precious metals addiction, Jake couldn't help but whistle. It was an old tune, something about coming home again. Vextar and his supremacy fleet had just picked a fight with the one species in the galaxy that turned never again into an art form. This was going to be fun. The holding cells aboard Vextar's mothership were surprisingly comfortable. Assuming you enjoyed the ambience of a luxury prison designed by aliens with no understanding of human psychology. Jake found himself sharing space with about 200 other humans, ranging from farmers to miners to one particularly fierce elderly woman who'd introduced herself as Betty Kowalski. "They grabbed me right out of my garden," Betty announced to anyone within earshot. "I was fertilizing my tomatoes when these scaled morons showed up with their fancy ships. Didn't even let me finish watering." Jake decided he liked Betty immediately. "How long have you been here, ma'am?" 3 weeks, and I'm getting real tired of their hospitality." Betty gestured around the holding area. "Food tastes like recycled cardboard, the beds are too short, and they keep playing that awful music over the speakers." As if summoned by her complaint, a melodic warbling filled the air that sounded like someone strangling a synthesizer. "That's supposed to be soothing," explained a pair of identical twins who'd introduced themselves as Rex and Tex, mechanics from the Outer Rim. "The guards told us it promotes compliance and reduces aggressive behavior." "It's making me want to strangle something," Rosa muttered. "That's because you're human," said another colonist, a middle-aged teacher named Marcus. "We don't do compliance music. We do spite." Jake was beginning to understand why Vextar thought humans made good workers. They were absolutely right about the stubborn part. "Has anyone seen how many other ships they have?" Jake asked casually. "Hundreds," Rex said. "Maybe thousands. This is just one fleet of many. And they're all full of humans." "And?" "Full to bursting," Tex confirmed. "They've got processing centers on a dozen worlds. Humans go in, slaves come out." "Processing centers," Jake repeated, feeling that cold sensation in his stomach again. "They're very efficient," Marcus said bitterly. "Separate families. Break down resistance. Assign work details based on physical capability. Anyone who fights back gets sent to the mines." "The mines?" "Heavy labor, dangerous conditions, short life expectancy," Betty said matter-of-factly. "They showed us videos during orientation. Very motivational." Jake looked around at the assembled humans. Despite weeks or months of captivity, despite being threatened and brutalized, every single face showed the same expression. It barely contained fury mixed with stubborn determination. These weren't broken slaves. These were pissed-off humans planning revenge. The cell door opened with a musical chime, and Vextar himself strutted in, followed by a squad of guards. The Admiral looked immensely pleased with himself. "Ah, Captain Morrison," Vextar said. "I trust you are beginning to understand your situation." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Jake replied. "You're running a slavery operation, and you think humans make good merchandise." "Precisely. Your species shows remarkable adaptability. You survive in conditions that would kill most other races, you breed efficiently, and you possess an admirable work ethic once properly motivated." "That work ethic," Jake said thoughtfully. "You know what drives it, right?" "Superior genetics, obviously." Jake started laughing. He couldn't help it. The sound echoed through the holding area, and other humans began joining in. Soon, 200 humans were laughing at Admiral Vextar the Magnificent. "What is so amusing?" Vextar demanded. "You really didn't do your research, did you?" Jake wiped his eyes. "That work ethic you admire so much. It's not genetic, it's cultural. We work hard because we believe in building something better for our children." "Irrelevant. And that stubbornness you find so useful, it comes from about 10,000 years of being told we can't do something, then doing it anyway just to prove people wrong. Your history is meaningless. And that durability you're so fond of." Jake's smile turned predatory. "That comes from surviving everything the universe has thrown at us. Ice ages, plagues, wars, natural disasters, and idiots who thought they could conquer us." "You are slaves now," Vextar said firmly. "Your past achievements are irrelevant to your current circumstances." Betty Kowalski stood up slowly, all 5 feet and 90 pounds of her radiating menace. Son, you clearly don't know much about humans. We've got a saying back on Earth: never again. We learned it the hard way, about 200 years ago. One elderly female does not concern me. It should, Betty said sweetly. Because this elderly female raised 6 sons, buried 2 husbands, and survived the Martian mining disaster of 2387. And right now she's wondering how many different ways she can use that pretty uniform of yours to strangle you. Bextar stepped back instinctively. The thing is, Jake continued conversationally, humans don't just remember history. We learn from it. And one thing we learned is that when someone tries to enslave us, we don't just escape. We make sure it never happens again. You are in no position to make threats. And stay. No. Still not a threat, Jake said. Just a friendly educational moment. You see, about now my message should be reaching Earth, and when Earth finds out what you've been doing to human colonies. Jake shrugged. Yes. Well, let's just say you're about to discover why every other species in the galaxy thinks humans are completely insane. Vextar left the holding area quickly, his guards trailing behind him. Jake could hear him barking orders in his own language, something about increasing security and monitoring communications. Think they're worried? Rosa asked. They should be, Jake replied. Betty, how good are you with alien technology? The elderly woman grinned, revealing teeth that had seen better decades but eyes that sparkled with mischief. Honey, I raised 6 boys and kept a farm running for 40 years. If it's got buttons and wires, I can figure out how to break it. Rex, Tex, you boys ready to do some creative engineering? The twins exchanged glances and identical grins. Just point us toward their engine room, Captain. Jake looked around at the assembled humans, 200 people who should have been broken and defeated. Instead, they looked like they were ready to take apart an entire alien fleet with their bare hands. Vextar was right about one thing. Humans were remarkably stubborn. He was about to find out just how stubborn. Admiral Patricia Iron Lady Chen was having her morning coffee when the priority alert came through Fleet Command. She'd been expecting bad news, the kind that usually arrived at dark 30 and ruined perfectly good weekends. What she wasn't expecting was a full tactical analysis of an alien invasion fleet accompanied by what appeared to be a declaration of war against humanity. Sir, her aide announced nervously, Captain Morrison's report just came through the deep space relay. Chen read through the message twice, her expression growing progressively darker. Then she read it a 3rd time, just to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. They're enslaving human colonies, she said finally. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. For labor purposes. Yes, sir. And they think this is acceptable because they consider themselves superior. It's Scifi. That appears to be their position, sir. Chen set down her coffee cup with extreme care. In her 30-year career, she'd seen humanity fight pirates, rebels, hostile alien species, and their own stupidity. But this was different. This was someone treating humans like livestock. Send a flash message to all fleet commanders, she said quietly. Full mobilization. Effective immediately. Sir? All fleets? All of them. Colonial Defense Force, Home Fleet, Merchant Marine, hell, send word to the mining guilds and the freight haulers. If it can mount a weapon and travel faster than light, I want it armed and heading for the frontier. The aide paused. Sir, that's going to strip every defense installation in human space. Good, Chen said. Send another message to the diplomatic corps. Tell them to contact every allied species and explain the situation. Make it clear that this is not a request for assistance. This is a courtesy notification that we're about to remind the galaxy why humans are considered certifiably insane. Within 6 hours, every human military installation from Earth to the Outer Rim was buzzing with activity. Ships that hadn't seen action in years were pulled from mothballs and loaded with enough firepower to sterilize small moons. Merchant vessels were hastily fitted with military-grade weapons. Even civilian ships volunteered for combat duty. The response was so massive that other species' intelligence services immediately began analyzing whether humanity had lost its collective mind. Meanwhile, aboard Vextar's mothership, Jake and his fellow prisoners were discovering that alien technology, while impressive, but suffered from the same flaw as most overly complex systems. It assumed the users weren't creative psychopaths with nothing to lose. The environmental controls are tied into the main computer network, Bumblethorne explained happily, having spent the past day analyzing the cell's control panel. Fascinating design, really. Very efficient. But they prioritized elegance over security. Can you access other systems? Jake asked. Oh, yes. Life support, communications, even the navigation computers. It's all integrated. Betty Kowalski looked up from where she'd been examining the cell door's locking mechanism. Found the manual override, she announced. Took me about 10 minutes. These idiots put everything at human height. Because they think we're the perfect size for servants, Rosa said grimly. Their mistake, Rex said. He and Tex had spent the morning cataloging every piece of removable equipment in the holding area. We've got enough components to build some interesting devices. Define interesting, Jake said. Well, Tex grinned. Remember that lesson about electromagnetic pulse generation from basic engineering? Jake felt his own grin widening. Gentlemen, ladies, I believe it's time to give our hosts a demonstration of human ingenuity. The first sign of trouble came when the ship's environmental systems began playing music from Earth's classical collection instead of the alien compliance warbling. The guards thought it was a minor malfunction until the temperature in their quarters began fluctuating between Arctic and tropical settings. The second sign came when the prison ship's external communications began broadcasting a continuous loop message in perfect standard. This is Admiral Patricia Chen of the Colonial Defense Force. You have exactly 72 hours to release all human prisoners and surrender yourselves for war crimes prosecution. Failure to comply will result in consequences. Vextar stormed into the holding area to find 200 humans sitting calmly while Beethoven's Ninth Symphony played over the ship's speakers. What have you done? He demanded. Us? Jake asked innocently. We're prisoners, remember? We couldn't possibly have done anything. My systems are malfunctioning. Technology can be so unreliable, Betty said sympathetically. Back on the farm, we always said the fancier the equipment, the more ways it can break. You will reverse whatever sabotage you have implemented. Sabotage is such an ugly word, Jake said, echoing Vextar's earlier comment. We prefer creative troubleshooting. Vextar's communicator chirped urgently. He listened to the rapid alien chatter, his scaled features growing increasingly pale. There's something else, Jake said conversationally. That message from Admiral Chen? She's not making idle threats. You see, humans have this thing about slavery. We really, really don't like it. Your single fleet cannot challenge the supremacy. Single fleet? Jake started laughing again. Admiral, you really should have studied human history more carefully. When someone enslaves humans, we don't send a single fleet. Vextar's communicator chirped again, more urgently. We send everyone, Jake continued. Every ship, every weapon, every single human who can hold a gun or pilot a fighter. Because we learned something important about slavery a long time ago. Which is? Which? Jake's expression turned deadly serious. Never again means never again. Not to us, not to anyone else, and especially not to smug aliens who think they're better than everyone else. The lights flickered as another system fell victim to human creativity. In the distance, alarms began wailing as the ship's navigation computer started calculating random hyperspace jumps. 72 hours, Jake reminded Vextar as the alien admiral fled the holding area. You'd better start thinking about surrender terms. Betty Kowalski smiled sweetly. That boy's about to learn why you should never corner a species that turned spite into an art form. Through the ship's hull, they could hear the distant rumble of hyperspace engines, lots of them. Coming closer. The cavalry was coming. All of it. When Admiral Chen's fleet dropped out of hyperspace 3 days later, Vextar finally understood the scope of his mistake. The human armada stretched across 3 light minutes of space, a bristling mass of weapons platforms, battleships, carriers, destroyers, frigates, and what appeared to be heavily armed garbage scows. "Sir," his tactical officer reported in a voice that suggested imminent career change, "I count 1,400 human vessels." "Correction, 1,500. "Correction. How many?" Vextar demanded. "We've stopped counting at 2,000, sir. They're still arriving." Aboard the Lucky Break, which had been recovered from the mothership's docking bay during the confusion of 20 separate system failures, Jake watched the human fleet deploy with professional appreciation. "That's either massive overkill or exactly the right amount of kill," he observed. "Rosa, what's our tactical assessment?" "The Supremacy Fleet has approximately 400 ships, all technologically superior to our individual vessels," Rosa reported. "However, they appear to be suffering from widespread system failures, and we outnumber them 5 to 1. "System failures," Jake mused. "I wonder how that happened." "Complete mystery," Betty said innocently from the engineering station, where she was helping Pip monitor the alien fleet's increasingly desperate repair efforts. The main view screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Chen's stern face aboard the flagship Payback. Behind her, the bridge buzzed with activity as hundreds of ships coordinated the galaxy's most thoroughly planned tantrum. "Captain Morrison," Chen said crisply. "Situation report. All human prisoners recovered, Admiral. The aliens have been very educational about their slavery operation. Apparently, they've got processing centers on 12 worlds and about 50,000 humans in various stages of captivity." "Processing centers," Chen repeated, her voice dropping several degrees below freezing. "Yes, sir. They're very proud of their efficiency." Chen's expression suggested she was contemplating new and creative applications for military ordnance. "Captain, please inform Admiral Vextar that he has exactly 10 minutes to begin releasing all human prisoners and surrendering his fleet for war crimes prosecution. And if he refuses, then we demonstrate why every other species in the galaxy thinks humans are completely insane." The communication channel closed, and Jake opened a frequency to the Supremacy flagship. "Admiral Vextar, this is Captain Morrison. Admiral Chen would like a word." There was a long pause before Vextar's image appeared on screen. The alien looked like he'd been having a very bad week. "You cannot be serious about attacking the Supremacy Fleet," Vextar said. "We are willing to negotiate the return of some prisoners, please." "Some?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "A reasonable percentage. Perhaps half." "Counteroffer," Jake said pleasantly. "All of them, plus surrender of your entire fleet, plus compensation for damages, plus turning over everyone involved in your slavery operation for trial." "Preposterous. We are the superior race." "Admiral," Jake said patiently, "you've been operating on some bad assumptions. First, that technological superiority equals military superiority. Second, that humans will accept reasonable losses. Third, that we negotiate from positions of weakness. You are outnumbered by superior vessels. We're outnumbering you by superior vessels. Ours just happen to be crewed by a species that considers acceptable losses to be a foreign concept." Vextar's image flickered as another of his systems failed. Through the static, Jake could hear alarms and panicked voices. "Your time's up," Jake announced. The human fleet opened fire. It wasn't a battle so much as a comprehensive physics lesson in the difference between having better technology and knowing how to use it creatively. The Supremacy ships were individually superior, but they'd been designed by a species that fought according to established rules and tactics. Humans, as the rest of the galaxy knew, didn't do rules. Merchant vessels modified with military shields rammed alien cruisers, while battleships provided covering fire. Fighters swarmed through the alien formations like angry hornets, targeting sensor arrays and weapon systems with surgical precision. Mining ships deployed asteroid nets to tangle enemy vessels, while freight haulers unleashed cargo containers filled with improvised explosives. "Their targeting systems can't adapt to our tactical patterns," Rosa reported with satisfaction. They keep trying to predict our movements based on standard military doctrine. Standard military doctrine, Jake laughed. We're using garbage scows as ram ships and freight containers as bombs. I don't think there's anything standard about this. The Supremacy fleet began breaking apart under the assault, individual ships attempting to flee as their formations collapsed. But human ships were everywhere, cutting off escape routes and methodically reducing each alien vessel to scrap metal and regret. Vextar's flagship, crippled by cascading system failures and surrounded by human battleships, finally sent a surrender signal. "Admiral Chen," Jake called, "I believe our friend wants to discuss terms." "No terms," Chen's voice came back ice cold. "Unconditional surrender, full disclosure of all slavery operations, and immediate release of every human in Supremacy custody." Through the static-filled communication channel, Vextar's voice was barely recognizable. We surrender. All operations will be disclosed. All prisoners will be released." "Smart choice," Jake said. "And Admiral, for future reference, you might want to research a species before you decide to enslave them. Humans have some very strong opinions about that sort of thing." As the battle ended and the Supremacy fleet surrendered, Jake looked around at his crew. Pip was grinning from ear to ear, Rosa looked grimly satisfied, and Bumblethorn was taking notes on alien surrender protocols. "Well," Jake announced, "I'd say that went better than expected." "The fleet coordination was remarkable," Bumblethorn observed. "I count vessels from every human military branch, plus civilian volunteers, mining consortiums, and what appears to be a heavily armed luxury yacht." "That's the Golden Fleece," Rosa said, checking her tactical display. "Belongs to Marcus Goldstein, that entertainment mogul. He armed it with military-grade weapons and brought his entire security fleet." Jake shook his head in amazement. 2,000 ships. When humans say never again, we really mean it. In the space around them, the human fleet began the methodical process of securing alien vessels and rescuing prisoners. It would take weeks to process the Supremacy's surrender and dismantle their slavery operation. But that was fine. Humans were very thorough when they put their minds to something, especially when that something involved making sure certain mistakes never happened again. 3 months later, Jake found himself standing in the gardens of Fleet Command on Earth, wearing a dress uniform that was only slightly less comfortable than a torture device, listening to Admiral Chen deliver a speech about humanity's proportionate response to galactic aggression. Proportionate. Jake almost snorted. 2,000 ships, 50,000 personnel, and enough firepower to rearrange several solar systems, all to rescue prisoners and dismantle a slavery operation. Other species would have sent a diplomatic protest. The Galactic Council has expressed concern about humanity's response to the Supremacy incident, Chen was saying to the assembled crowd of military officers, government officials, and media representatives. They feel our reaction may have been somewhat excessive. Excessive, Jake muttered to Rosa, who was standing beside him in her own uncomfortable dress uniform. We didn't even blow up any planets. The war crimes tribunals are proceeding smoothly, Chen continued. Admiral Vextar and his senior staff have been sentenced to life imprisonment on mining worlds, where they'll have the opportunity to experience manual labor from a different perspective. Jake grinned. There was something poetic about former slave masters breaking rocks for the rest of their lives. The Supremacy's slavery operations have been completely dismantled, Chen announced. All processing centers have been liberated, all prisoners have been returned to their families, and the affected star systems have been placed under Colonial Defense Force protection. The crowd applauded politely. Jake noticed that several alien diplomats in attendance looked distinctly uncomfortable. Furthermore, Chen continued, the Galactic Council has ratified new anti-slavery legislation, with enforcement protocols that ensure rapid response to any future violations. More applause. Jake suspected the rapid response protocols had less to do with galactic justice and more to do with other species not wanting to deal with another 2,000-ship human tantrum. After the ceremony, Jake found himself in Chen's office, along with his crew and several other officers who'd participated in the operation. Congratulations, Captain, Chen said, handing him a medal that probably cost more than his annual salary. The Colonial Defense Cross, for extraordinary service in the liberation of human prisoners. Thank you, Admiral. Though I should point out that my crew did most of the actual work. Which is why they're getting medals too, Chen smiled. Pip, your system analysis was crucial to the operation's success. Rosa, your tactical coordination during the rescue phase was exemplary. Professor Bumblethorne, your technical sabotage kept the alien fleet confused long enough for our forces to arrive. Betty Kowalski, who'd insisted on attending the ceremony despite being a civilian, stepped forward with a grin. What about us prisoners? We were the ones who kept those alien boys busy while you were mobilizing half the galaxy. Chen laughed. Mrs. Kowalski, the colonial government is offering full compensation for your ordeal, plus priority placement in any colony of your choice. I'll take New Topeka, Betty said promptly. Someone needs to replant those tomatoes. As the group dispersed, Jake found himself alone with Chen, looking out at the gardens where families were reuniting with rescued loved ones. Admiral, Jake said quietly, what happens next time? Next time? Ace. When someone else decides humans look like good slaves or easy targets, or just generally annoying neighbors. Chen considered the question seriously. The same thing that happened this time, Captain. We remind them why never again isn't just a slogan. And if they don't listen, then we use smaller words and bigger guns until they understand. Jake nodded, satisfied. Outside, children were playing in the gardens while their parents discussed the practical details of rebuilding destroyed colonies. And normal human concerns, work, family, the future. You know what the really funny part is? Jake said. What's that? Vextar was right about humans being stubborn and hard to kill. He just didn't understand what that meant. Which is? That we're not good slaves because we're durable. Jake grinned. We're durable because we refuse to be good slaves. Chen smiled back. I'll make sure that goes in the official report for the historical record. As Jake left Fleet Command and headed back to the Lucky Break, he reflected on humanity's newest reputation in the galaxy. Before the supremacy incident, other species had considered humans to be ambitious, unpredictable, and slightly insane. Now they knew humans were ambitious, unpredictable, completely insane, and absolutely unwilling to tolerate anyone who threatened their freedom. The Lucky Break was scheduled to depart for the frontier in 2 days, resuming their exploration mission. Jake was looking forward to getting back to the routine business of discovering new worlds and cataloging alien life forms. But he suspected that routine wouldn't last long. Someone, somewhere, would eventually decide that humans looked like easy targets again. When that happened, Jake hoped they'd remember the lesson of Admiral Vextar the Magnificent and his supremacy fleet. Never underestimate a species that turned never again into a promise. Because humans kept their promises, even when it required mobilizing every ship in known space and turning interstellar politics into a comprehensive demonstration of applied spite. Especially then,